So, have you ever heard this theory that the planets lining up can actually trigger massive earthquakes right here on Earth? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but one research group has just put out a warning based on that exact idea, and they're talking about a quake of, well, terrifying proportions. So what's really going on here? Let's dig in. And look, this isn't some vague, far-off premonition. A very specific forecast has been made, and it's kicking up a huge storm of debate online. The claim is incredibly bold, the stakes are as high as they get, and it really makes you wonder, is this a credible warning we should be listening to, or just a dangerous guess?
Okay, so the group behind this is called the Solar System Geometry Survey, or SSGEOs for short. And their whole idea, their whole thing, is that when planets get into certain alignments, their combined gravity puts a huge squeeze on Earth's tectonic plates. And they believe we're heading into the most critical window for that kind of celestial pressure that we've seen all year.
And they're getting super specific with the dates, they're not being vague about it. According to SSGEOs, the danger period kicks off on January 19th, with the absolute peak risk hitting on the 19th and 20th. Then there's a second related window of concern that opens up just a couple of days after that. Okay, so what are they actually saying is going to happen on these days? Yeah, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake. In their worst-case scenario, they're warning that these upcoming alignments could set off a seismic event big enough to flatten entire cities. We're talking about the kind of earthquake that literally rewrites maps and can change coastlines forever. So what in the cosmos could possibly cause something that huge? Well, the secret sauce to their whole theory is this thing they call tight convergence. This is when a bunch of planets, the sun, and our own moon all kind of line up in these very specific geometric patterns. You could almost think of it like a bunch of people all pulling on a rope at the same time, but from slightly different angles. The idea is that all those gravitational forces pulling together could be the final little push that makes an already stressed out tectonic plate finally snap. And apparently this particular alignment, it's a doozy. We've got Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter all getting in on the action, and it's happening during a new moon. Now during a new moon, the sun and the moon are already lined up, pulling on the Earth from the same general direction. The SSGEO's theory says that when you throw 4 more planets into that cosmic tug of war, that's what makes this moment so uniquely dangerous. Okay, but here is where it gets kind of spooky. The places they're warning about aren't just random spots on a map. They're pointing to some of the most geologically stressed out, overdue fault lines on the entire planet. So, let's talk about one of the main spots they're pointing to, the Cascadia subduction zone. This is a monster of a fault that runs all the way from Northern California up to British Columbia. Its last megaquake was way back in the year 1700. Now, these things tend to go off every 240 years or so, which means, yeah, this sleeping giant is seriously overdue. For scientists, it's not a matter of if it's going to rupture, it's a matter of when.
And you could imagine people in the region are already on edge. Just a few days before this planetary prediction came out, a pretty strong 6.2 quake hit off the coast of Oregon. Now, it wasn't the big one, but it was a powerful reminder of the incredible tectonic forces that are constantly at work there. So when this new prediction dropped, it felt, well, a little too close for comfort.
And it's not just Cascadia. They're also looking at this huge seismic gap off the coast of Peru and northern Chile. What's so fascinating here is that you can see the areas where massive quakes already happened back in 1868 and 1877. That giant blank spot right in the middle, that's the part that hasn't ruptured, and seismologists are watching it like a hawk. It's a zone that's just building up and storing a massive amount of energy.
And if you look at how often these things happen, you see the same pattern of, well, overdue stress. Cascadia, like we said, has a big one on average every 240 years, and it's been over 300. The Peru-Chile gap has an even shorter cycle, about 153 years for a really big one, and the last was in 1877. The point is, geologically speaking, both of these regions are wound incredibly tight.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? You've got this wild prediction method that's pointing to real danger zones that scientists are already worried about. So, is there something to this whole planetary alignment theory, or is it just a creepy coincidence?
But, and this is a big but, this is where the mainstream scientific community steps in with a major reality check. Critics of these kinds of forecasts argue that predicting a quake in a known earthquake zone is, well, it's kind of like predicting it's going to snow in Alaska in the winter. We already know the risk is there. Saying it could happen sooner or later, or even within a week, just isn't specific enough to be a useful scientific prediction.
This really breaks it down perfectly. You've got 2 totally different ways of looking at earthquakes. On one side, you have the SSGOS method, which is all about external triggers from space, to name a specific date. On the other, you have mainstream seismology, which looks at what's happening inside the Earth, the slow, steady buildup of stress on fault lines, and then calculating the probability of a quake over long periods, like decades. One is a pretty controversial theory, the other is the established scientific consensus.
Look, the bottom line from pretty much all mainstream scientists is this. We just can't predict the exact time, location, and magnitude of a big earthquake yet. We're not there. Now, they do admit that gravitational forces, especially from our sun and moon, cause tiny tides in the solid Earth. And yeah, those tides can have a tiny influence on seismic activity, but the keyword there is tiny.
So how small are we talking? Well, research suggests that the extra stress from these tidal forces is less than 1% of the total stress that's already built up on a fault line. So sure, maybe it could be the final straw that breaks the camel's back if a fault is already at its absolute breaking point. But these forces are not the main driver. They just can't cause a massive earthquake all by themselves.
So where does that leave us? How do we make sense of all this? Well, it's kind of like a classic case of getting the right answer, but for the wrong reason. The geological risk in places like Cascadia and Peru, it is 100% real, and it's backed by decades of solid scientific data. But the method of using planets to pinpoint a date, that is still firmly outside of mainstream peer-reviewed science.
All right, so let's just boil this all down to the key takeaways. First, planetary alignment is not a scientifically proven way to predict earthquakes. Full stop. Second, the underlying geological danger in these areas is absolutely legitimate, and it's something to be aware of if you live there. Third, that recent earthquake in Oregon, that's just business as usual for an active tectonic zone. And finally, and this is the most important part, being prepared with an earthquake kit and a plan is always a rational, smart thing to do. Panicking based on an unproven theory is not.
You know, at the end of the day, predictions like this really play on our deep-seated fear of the unknown, right? We all want some certainty. But while the forecasts based on the planets might be grabbing headlines, the real actionable truth is in the geology. The Earth is going to keep doing its thing. And the real question isn't if the big one is coming for these regions, but rather, are we going to be ready when it does? Awareness is our best defense, not alarm.